Trump has done something terrible. He may not realize this, but his decisions will echo down in history as one of the worst ever made by a president. Part 1. Government interference. Government interference into things that they should not partake in almost always lead to bad outcomes, specifically in regards to healthcare. The government does a terrible job of this. But if the government's goal was to take a snowball rolling down a hill and turn it into an avalanche, then they actually do a great job at that. Sadly, at the end of the hill, there are innocent people who get sucked into the avalanche, and were it not for the grace of a savior, the whole of America would be pulled under. And America is being pulled under, make no mistake. Two examples of this are government mandating care for, in one instance, diabetes, and in another instance, gender care. We can see from the chart that there has been a rapid increase in diabetes diagnosis in the US since the 1990s. And what you may not be aware of is that in the 1990s, state governments started mandating that diabetes care be covered by insurance companies. Of course, I'm not saying, because I know people will read into this, I am not saying that diabetes hasn't actually risen, that type 2 diabetes hasn't actually risen. Yes, it has risen, and yes, ultimately that comes back to the individual, no matter how many corporations are out there making processed junk garbage food. The processed junk garbage food wouldn't exist if there was no demand for it. But what I am saying is that it would be completely stupid and unwise to not recognize that things add gas to the flames. Gas to the flames, like mandating that Medicaid covered gender care in 2014. You can see that there is a 2.5 times increase from 2013 to 2014, which was likely fueled by that governmental gas. Part 2. Trump and IVF. How does this apply to Trump, and what is this betrayal that I speak of? Trump recently came out in support of government-mandated IVF, otherwise known as in vitro fertilization. For those unaware, IVF is a process in which the eggs are taken from the mother and sperm is taken from the father, and they are combined in a petri dish to form a brand new human. The goal then is to take that brand new human, so long as it meets the criteria of whoever is requesting the in vitro fertilization, the goal is to take that human and then implant that human into the womb. What you probably aren't aware of is that for every one human that is successfully implanted into the womb, there are 19 other humans that are frozen, discarded, donated for scientific experimentation, or died as a result of the process of IVF. This is not even to mention the systemic genocide of those scientifically predicted to have certain genetic abnormalities, the wrong sex, and other attributes that they test for while the humans are still incredibly small. You may think that this policy Trump has brought forth is something that the left has already been pushing for. You may think that Cala has been pushing for this policy and that AOC has been pushing for government-mandated IVF, and that's why Trump had to respond and say, oh yeah, I am in great support of this policy. And the reality is that Ben Zaslav did some research and could not find a person on the left pushing for this murderous and socialist policy. Yes, I said socialist policy. It will cost the taxpayers millions of dollars. On average, for the person seeking to do IVF, treatments cost anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000. It is not cheap to build a baby in a petri dish, to create your factory baby and receive the exact traits that you want.
Welcome to Build a Baby, where anyone who wants a baby can Build one.
That are able to be tested for while this baby is in a petri dish. It isn't cheap, and we're going to be footing the bill for that. Part 3, how did we get here? On August 23rd, 2024, at 11:39 a.m. to be exact, Donald Trump truthed or posted, whatever you prefer, from his Truth Social account and said, "My administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights." Now, anyone with a half-functioning brain who has been aware of what's going on knows that when someone says that they're great for reproductive rights, really what they're doing is making a euphemism and actually stating that they support in some way murder of the unborn. And on that same exact day after that post was made, RFK came out with a massive endorsement of Donald Trump. Coincidence?
Don't you want a president who's going to get us out of the wars and who's going to rebuild the middle class in this country?
And then the pushback started. And of course, true abolitionists have always been pushing back against his murderous and insane policies, but things started to ramp up. On August 24th, the next day, Saturday, Ben Zeisloff posted, "I am an evangelical voter in Pennsylvania. I want to vote Trump, but his leftward shift on abortion has forced me to withhold my vote. I pray that he reverses course, but until then, I refuse to reward betrayal with my vote." This post got 1.5 million views. And so you could see that the fire was starting to be kindled. Things were starting to move. Even reposts like this one from Rachel Berkey got over 300,000 views. And I can guarantee you that even the pro-life normies who are okay with incremental bills and other things that we as abolitionists are not okay with saw these posts and it influenced them. But none of this stopped the Trump-splainers from trying to wipe away what Donald Trump had stated here. Kristen Hawkins said, "Today Trump put out a statement on Truth Social saying his administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights. In parentheses, likely he meant IVF, which is a horrible evil."
This understandably upset many within the pro-life movement, and it is likely a choice by someone within his campaign attempting to be cutesy with his messaging.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. Cutesy is no excuse for what we all knew to be true. And then she says right here,
"Too many little lives depend on this election to waste your vote." And
that tweet won't age so well. Unfortunately, we have also got to the place where there's other Trump-splainers who shouldn't be Trump-splaining for Trump. But we have John Harris here who says, "Someone please point me to Trump's abortion policy proposal that's morally equivalent to Harris's. I'm not asking about rhetoric or personal views." And then William Wolf also gets into the fray. "I keep telling people to remember this. Trump was hands down the best Republican president we've had in decades. His record is strong. Truth Social posts aren't executive orders. Try not to be so emotionally reactive and keep the bigger picture in mind. It's freedom versus gay." I have a little surprise.
Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday, you said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams come true! Just do it!
Both of these men ought to know better when they see something like this, and both of these tweets aged incredibly, incredibly poorly. Back to the timeline. The coming Monday after that weekend, Trump received an endorsement from yet another left individual who is incredibly popular with the liberal conservative group, Tulsi Gabbard. Again, coincidence? On August 29th, Trump released his plan for government-mandated IVF coverage by insurance, which he...
In addition, as part of our efforts to help working families, I'm announcing today in a major statement that under the Trump administration, your government will pay for, or your insurance company will be mandated to pay for all costs associated with IVF treatment, fertilization for women.
Had hinted at in the past. Also on August 29th, Trump spoke with a reporter, and when asked about issue 4, which would enshrine abortion as a right in the Constitution of Florida, he said,
well, I think the 6 week is too short. It has to be more time, and so and I've told them that I want more weeks.
So you'll vote in favor of the amendment?
I'm voting that I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks.
So did he specifically say he was going to vote for the enshrinement of abortion into law in Florida? No, but when she was specifically asking that, and his response is,
I'm voting that I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks.
That is clearly what everyone understood that to mean, and therefore the crap storm began to brew on X once again. But this time it was different. Started by the abolitionists, but pro-lifers, many across the board started jumping on this. We simply cannot support someone who is okay with the sacrifice of unborn children. And they recognized that even this was a step too far. The problem is that Trump is taking 5 steps towards child sacrifice and only 1 step back. And he did take 1 step back. After that crap storm of tweets, he did decide the next day to come out when a reporter asked him and specifically say,
so I'll be voting no for that reason.
Now, there's many takeaways from this, but one of the takeaways is that pressure campaigns do work. You have 1 ounce of power, and that ounce of power is the ability to withhold your vote from someone who does terrible things. That's your 1 ounce of power. Unless they change, you can withhold your vote. Part 3, extrapolation. The CDC estimates that more than 238,000 patients attempted IVF in 2021. If clinics created between 7 and 8 embryos for every patient, that would yield about 1.6 million to 1.9 million over a year. Now, obviously, I think that 7 to 8 embryonic humans is lower than the 19 above. I think that's a little low, but let's just ignore that for a moment. Let's be generous and give it 1.6 million dead humans per year. If it follows the trend of gender care, we would reasonably expect that the number of dead would increase by 2.4 million. And that's a low estimate. For comparison, abortion kills roughly 1 million a year. If IVF follows the path of diagnosed diabetes, which I don't think it will, but I just wanted to give another example, it would likely 4x over the course of 30 years. I think that due to the asymptotic behavior of our culture going up to complete degeneracy, and with the increase in fertility and decrease in sperm count, we are looking at an evil unlike anything we have seen thus far. But it is a clean evil. I recently heard a well-meaning pro-life leader state that they wanted to convince people by showing them the bloodiness of abortion. And let me tell you that the most efficient and effective means of child sacrifice are those that are hardly bloody. They are accepted because the child is small, made outside the womb, made behind clean doors in a clean laboratory with a doctor that has a lab coat on, and they're just completely out of sight of the majority of pro-life organizations. They are clean. They aren't ripping limbs off. They're simply discarding the humans. They're simply tossing them into the trash or into a freezer. So in this way, Trump is signing up for a clean evil that betrays the very foundation, the very start of what makes us human. This policy discards the mentally ill, the humans that might live with a heart defect or a gender that their parents didn't want. This policy is so far from right-wing and disgustingly immoral. If you want to do nothing about this, then shut off this video. And if you actually want to do something, then keep watching. It isn't hard. You just have to stand up for the least of these as Jesus commands. Part 5. Kamala. Kamala is a tool of the devil himself, but don't let her disgustingness eclipse that of Trump's. Kamala has yet to support the move to the socialist left that Trump has made, specifically the government funding of IVF care. And if she does, whose fault will it be other than Trump and his team? If for some reason she resists the rightward pressure to go left, she will have less deaths on her hand than Trump. Let that sink in for a moment. If Kamala does not accept this position, specifically government covering IVF care, less humans will die under her than under Trump. Both of them support mandating insurances to cover IVF care. And if she does accept it, it will be the fault of those on the right pushing for a left-wing socialist policy of death. Part 6, Biblical. In Exodus 18:21, God clearly states to Moses that he ought to choose leaders who fear God, are trustworthy, and unwilling to accept a bribe. I see no reason why this should not apply today. Because I fear God rather than a man named Trump or a woman named Kamala, I am choosing to not reward the betrayal of humankind and God himself with a vote for Trump. He does not fear the one who will not be mocked for the mass murder of unborn children. He has accepted the bribe of child sacrifice in exchange for votes, and we cannot reward him. He has lost all trust with his stance on this, his floundering on issue 4, his attack on Arizona's abortion policy to make it less stringent than it already was, and his lack of will to protect the most vulnerable and innocent. Part 7, Pushback. What do I do? So I know you may not be entirely convinced by Exodus 18:21 and that it should guide how we choose leaders. You're likely sitting there thinking, I have to choose the lesser of two evils. This is the only option I have in this circumstance. And I just want to say that that thinking has been drilled into you time after time after time after time. And the reality is that if you were in a situation where two leaders were there and one of them was you and one of them was someone else, then you would admit that those 3 rules that God provides in Exodus 18:21 are good rules, and you would try to convince the other leader to accept that position. Well, what about with 4 people? Well, what about with 8 people? Well, what about with 8 million people? You see, the principle still applies. We still ought to try to teach people to follow this command of God. And just so I'll put a cherry on top of this whole thing, the reason I went through that timeline is to show that pushback works. Trump bended to the will of the pro-life establishment after the pro-life establishment followed the abolitionists in saying that they wouldn't give their vote for Trump, or they would consider not voting for Trump. There was so much pushback on it online, and of course Trump comes out the next day, and what does he say? He changes his mind completely. We have to hold our leaders to a high standard, and while Exodus 18:21 is a high standard, it's honestly not that high. We want our leaders to be trustworthy, we want them to follow and fear God, and we want them to not accept a bribe. As always, accept the gospel today if you haven't already, the free gift of Jesus Christ on the cross, dying for sins, dying for sinners like you and like I. Accept that gift. Abolition is the way to end this terrible, terrible thing. I hope you have a great day.